and we're glad to welcome you here to have an evening with Dr. Temple Grandin. This event is sponsored by the E.M. Manny Rosenthal Chair in Animal Science, and we're glad to have Dr. Grandin here this week. She's already lectured a couple times today. She's got some more lectures that will be very specific to animal science areas, but we want to make sure that she had a chance to give her presentation that deals a little bit more with autism than it does with just her normal day job of being an animal scientist and animal welfare specialist. A couple of things, I'll read a little bit of her introduction. I do want you to know that we will have a Q&A at the end of this, and after Dr. Grandin is finished, they're going to bring a couple of chairs. We'll sit out here and answer questions. We're already receiving some questions from you through Twitter. And so you see here that the hashtag on that is Temple, T-A-M-U. And if you have some questions, if you want to send that, we've got people in the back that are compiling those right now, and we'll use that as our starting point for some of the questions we might have during this time. One thing I would also request that you would not use any flash photography tonight while Dr. Grandin is speaking out of courtesy to her. Dr. Temple Grandin is a professor of animal science at Colorado State University, where she's been a pioneer in improving the handling and welfare of farm animals, and where she serves as an advocate for those on the autism spectrum and their families. Born in Boston, Massachusetts, Temple's achievements were remarkable because she was an autistic child. At age 2, she had no speech and had all the signs of severe autism. Many hours of speech therapy and intensive teaching enabled Temple to learn speech. As a teenager, life was hard with constant teasing. Mentoring by her high school science teacher and her aunt on her ranch in Arizona motivated Temple to study and to pursue a career as a scientist and a livestock equipment designer. Dr. Grandin obtained her BA at Franklin Pierce College in 1970. After some time in the livestock industry, she earned her MS in animal science at Arizona State University in 1975 for her work on the behavior of cattle in different squeeze chutes. Dr. Grandin was awarded her PhD in animal science from the University of Illinois in 1989. Her book, Animals in Translation, was a New York Times bestseller, and her book, Livestock Handling and Transport, is now in its 4th edition. Other popular books authored by Dr. Grandin include Thinking in Pictures, Emergence, labeled Autistic, Animals Make Us Human, Improving Animal Welfare, A Practical Approach, The Way I See It, and The Autistic Brain. She also has a popular TED Talk, The World Needs All Kinds of Minds, that has been viewed 4.4 million times as of this afternoon. Dr. Grandin has received numerous awards, including the Meritorious Achievement Award from the Livestock Conservation Institute, been named a distinguished alumnus at Franklin Pierce College, and receiving honorary degrees, honorary doctorates from McGill University, University of Illinois, Carnegie Mellon University, Duke University, and in 2011, Texas A&M University. She has also won numerous prestigious awards for her service to the livestock and meat industry. Temple was inducted into the Cowgirl Hall of Fame, and this spring, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. Several years ago, HBO premiered a movie about Temple's early life and career with the livestock industry. The movie received 7 Emmy Awards, a Golden Globe, and a Peabody Award. In 2016, Temple was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Science. Dr. Grandin is past member of the Board of Directors of the Autism Society of America. She lectures to parents and teachers throughout the United States on her experiences with autism. Articles and interviews have appeared in the New York Times, People, Time, National Public Radio, 2020, The View, and the BBC. She was also honored in Time Magazine's 2010, The 100 Most Influential People in the World. After our presentation and after the Q&A tonight, if you go back out on the first floor, there are books available for you to purchase and for her to autograph, and she'll be here to autograph those books for you, so I hope you'll take advantage of that. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Dr. Temple Grandin. Thank you.
Great to be here. Lots and lots of things to talk about tonight. Let's just get started. I was not a very good high school student. I didn't have any interest in studying. But the thing that finally got me interested in studying was the goal of becoming a scientist. And I had a good science teacher who helped get me turned around. Now, I might want to just start out and just tell you a little bit about autism. Autism goes all the way from Einstein, who had no speech at age 3, to people out in Silicon Valley. And I just got back to the Kennedy Space Center. You got lots of people that are kind of different there, building all kinds of interesting things. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got kids that can't talk. All has the same label. Let's just look at some famous people. Well, I had a great science teacher. He got me started on the right path. And a lot of grandparents today are kind of coming out of the woodwork and are realizing that their kid is on the autism spectrum. They're realizing that themselves are on the autism spectrum. I've had engineers come up to me, NASA scientists, computer programming people, and these granddads that were probably on the spectrum had a successful career. And one of the reasons they had a successful career is they learned how to work at a young age. What you got to do with kids on the spectrum, because they're not that social, you got to stretch them. You got to teach them social skills like they're in a foreign country. They got to learn things like turn taking when they're little. But one of the big problems right now is I'm seeing too many kids where their whole identity becomes autism. No, my identity is a scientist first, autism second. Now, I'm not going to want to change because I like the logical way I think. Now, the thing I want to ask you is what would happen to some of today's great innovators, or some of the innovators in the past? How about Jane Goodall? She had a 2-year secretarial degree and no scientific training when she did her famous research. Would that be possible today? I think it's getting harder and harder for people to get into things. There's a lot of now barriers of entry on academically. How about Thomas Edison? I went and read this biography. He was described as an addled, hyperactive high school dropout, and he was addled. He was probably on the spectrum, memorized every street, and he got in trouble, too. He was selling newspapers on the train, and he managed to burn up the baggage car of a train. That's, like, not very cool. You know, you're going to be in a lot of trouble for doing something like that. And what would happen to him today? I worked with a lot of really skilled millwrights on the big Cargill plants, Tyson plants. It was Montfort back when I worked on most of the things. And I worked with millwrights that I know were on the spectrum. But today there's a lot of kids getting shunted in special ed and they never get a chance to even try welding. Because some of these kids that are kind of different, they can just build anything. How about Steven Spielberg, dyslexic, rejected from a top film school? You know what saved him? His little Super 8 movie camera. That saved him. And then he got an internship at Universal Studios. And the legend is that he snuck in and then got a parking pass. And when I met Steven Spielberg, I'm kicking myself that I didn't ask him if it was really true about sneaking in. I was just down at Cape Kennedy, and I talked to a person there who designed super important stuff for Cape Kennedy. Dyslexic, rotten student, top math scores, terrible reading scores. See, when you get brains that are kind of different, maybe ADHD, talked to a student last night, he's got ADHD, he's probably going to end up in sales. That's a good place for ADHD. Dyslexic, Tourette's. Yeah, there's people designing important things for a lot of places, NASA included, that have Tourette's. So what comes first? You know, engineer at NASA or Tourette's? No, engineer at NASA comes first. How about Elon Musk? This is a fascinating book. He was a bit nerdy. And one of the things that helped him on getting SpaceX going, he learned how to work at an early age. But I'm seeing a lot of kids today getting addicted to video games, and they're not going anywhere. We've got to control the video games. It's 1 hour a day. And they're not becoming video game designers. Also, when I was down at Cape Kennedy, I had a chance to see a SpaceX launch. Watching a real launch is so much different than just watching it on TV. You know, some people think you can teach everything on videos. I think students need to actually get involved with doing real stuff. And some students today aren't involved with much real stuff. I was horrified to read in the newspaper a week ago that Home Depot has had to put out a videotape on how to use a tape measure. Now, one advantage that you've got here in Texas, you still got the hands-on classes here, but a lot of states have taken these things out. Like in my state, they took out all the auto shop out of the high schools. We have a huge shortage right now of skilled trades. These are good jobs. They're not going to get replaced by artificial intelligence. There's the Dragon spaceship docking with the space station. Its real name is Puff the Magic Dragon. Okay, engineering students, SpaceX is hiring. Because after I got back home, I immediately pulled up the SpaceX job board. They're wide open positions, bachelor's degrees in engineering. I'll tell you what they want: electrical mixed in with mechanical, and then computer science. Those three things mixed together, dab of physics too wouldn't hurt. They're hiring, and they're going to work your butt off. The door is wide open right now. So you got a kid that's a math geek. What would you rather be, SpaceX scientist or video game addict? I think being SpaceX scientist would be a whole lot more interesting. And I got to go visit Houston. That's the control room in Houston. And then down at Cape Kennedy, I got to go in the vehicle assembly building, super cool. I stood on top of it. And I looked at Cape Kennedy, and I go, why was what we did going to the moon so important? You know, as President Kennedy said, we did it because it was hard, not because it was easy. And it was one of the greatest things we did. And when you look back at the technology, what I've got in my pocket right now is 100 times more powerful than the computer that landed people on the moon, and we use it for silly things. Yeah, there's also research that shows that teenagers who spend too much time on social media have more depression and more suicide. I'm not suggesting getting rid of screens, but we need to limit it and get out and do some other things. And you might be wondering, why is the mission control for the space station half empty? Well, as the space station goes round and round and round, there's little blackout periods. Time for potty break. You got like 6 minutes, and even if there was an emergency, you couldn't do anything about it. And this is the space station simulator. There's a need for visual thinkers. You know, they had a robotic hand that they were demonstrating, and had little cords that worked the hand. And I said, if you got a way to repair that in space, because if I've got to pull those cords back through those guides, I got to have a wire with a hook on the end. I don't think they thought of that. You see, you need the visual thinkers along with the mathematical thinkers. I'm a visual thinker. And you had the accident at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. The problem is the engineers didn't see water going in there and flooding the basement. It's not a very good idea when you live next to the sea to have your emergency cooling pump in a non-waterproof basement. That's what they did. Now, a lot of these kids that were, you know, when they were kids, grew up with a lot of books and learning, early exposure to career interests. I know in animal science, they're doing a lot of stuff now with internships. I really recommend you get out and do internships, try on careers. So one student goes out and loves quality assurance in a meat plant. Another student went out and did, I don't know if I like that. Well, maybe then she needs to do something else. But you don't know until you try it. They also learned how to work at an early age. So I was a rotten student. In 9th grade, I got kicked out of high school for throwing a book at a girl who teased me and bullied me, called me all kinds of terrible names. And I went to special boarding school, and I spent the first 3 years cleaning their horse barn and running their horse barn. My parents weren't very happy about that. But when I look back on it, one of the most important things I learned is that I learned how to work. And I'm saying too many kids get a special ed label, and they're getting overprotected. Graduating from high school, they've never worked. I want the transition to work done before they graduate. Now, the problem we've got with autism is it goes all the way from someone who can't trust themselves to NASA space scientist. But what bothers me is the kid that should grow up to work for SpaceX, also Amazon Blue Origin, is right now building their vehicle assembly building. It's under construction right now. I saw it a week ago. They're hiring. You know how you find the job board? You type in SpaceX jobs, you type in Amazon Blue Horizon jobs, Blue Origin, I keep saying that wrong, jobs. They're hiring too. The door's right there, but you know, people are not seeing it. Not over-specialized, I had a great science teacher mentor. Okay, this is an interesting study. Scientists that win Nobel Prizes were more likely to have a creative hobby, like painting, acting, composing music. You know, some people think, well, engineers don't need the humanities. Yes, they do need them. Okay, these are the kind of classes we need to be keeping in the schools, which I'm glad that here in Texas you're doing that. But I'm seeing some schools where about all you can learn is algebra, English, and sports. And some kids are getting so overscheduled on sports, they're not doing enough stuff learning work skills and learning something for a career. Now, the thing about hands-on classes is they teach practical problem solving. You know, sometimes your projects don't work. I'm coming out with a new book this spring. It's going to be called Calling All Minds. It's going to be about famous inventors and my childhood projects that I made. I spent hours trying to build little bird kites and get them to fly behind my trike. Well, duplicating them as a grown-up wasn't easy because I couldn't get the same art paper. And I finally figured out that the textured paper affected the aeronautics. So then I looked up cool stuff about the scalloped pattern on the back of the Dreamliner engine, golf ball dimples, all kinds of fascinating things. And the kids can go out there and probably recreate my childhood projects better than I did. And it uses just simple stuff you can just get. Steve Jobs, probably be on the spectrum today, bullied in school. Einstein had no speech until age 3. Both of these scientists had a creative hobby. Einstein had violin, and Steve Jobs loved calligraphy. And that's why computers have such nice fonts. And of course, Microsoft copied that. But, okay. What I'm getting worried about is that too many kids are getting labeled autism, dyslexia, ADHD, Asperger, and these are fully verbal kids, and I'm worried that they're going to get screened out. And I'm especially worried about the visual thinkers. I'm going to tell you later on why NASA needs visual thinkers, too. Okay, so they can fix their little robotic hand. They need that. Yep, you need visual thinkers. Here are people that were in business that were dyslexic. They had vision. Visual dyslexics tend to have vision. They're very, very good in business. Here's another famous business person that had ADHD. Okay, Gary Cohn, Chief Operating Officer of Goldman Sachs, horrible dyslexic student, did not graduate from an Ivy League college. And you know what he said, and I agree with this, knowing where you want to end up is easier than figuring out how to start. This fits right in with when I had a goal to become a scientist, then there was a reason to get through math class, which was really hard. Fortunately, in 1966, I didn't have to take algebra because the national fad at the time was finite math. Lots of probabilities and lots of statistics. Yes, I had to be tutored. Okay, a lot of creative people did not complete a conventional educational path. You know, we got to figure out other ways to get them into things. There are some cases where a guy that was the lab tech ended up running a lab because he could think up all kinds of creative experiments. This is one of my most important slides, the different kinds of minds. I'm a photorealistic visual thinker. Everything I think about is a picture. When I first started out working with cattle, I didn't know that my visual thinking was different. I thought everybody was a visual thinker. And I couldn't figure out why other people couldn't see some of the things I could see. I'm an object visualizer. Absolutely terrible at algebra. It doesn't make any sense to me. Why not let the kid take geometry? Then there's the pattern thinker. This is your mathematician. This is what SpaceX wants to hire right now. Mathematicians. But you need some visual thinkers, because I saw something on the NASA launching pad that should not have been there. And I was the only one who saw it. Yes, and it waddled down the stairs as we were leaving. It was a raccoon. And it was sleeping on the second deck of inside the launch pad. And I said, have you thought about what he might be chewing on? Let me tell you what animals will chew. They will chew things that people have handled a lot. So if it's tool handles, that just makes you mad. But if it's wiring and something important, that can be very, very serious. So I'm not, this is a wildlife refuge, so we'd have to live trap him. But maybe put some GoPros in there and find out where he's going. I think he's trying to escape the gators. They got gators all over the place there, and they have these weird curved fences like this around the launch pads, so gators won't go in there. I'm going, you have got to be kidding. Why would gators want to go on the launch pad? Then you have the verbal thinker, the guy who knows all the facts about his favorite stuff. And then you have some dyslexic people, the great auditory thinker. They'll be good at sales. See, when you get a label, I'm talking about the fully verbal kids. When you get a label, you almost always have uneven skills. Good at one thing, terrible at something else. We're not doing enough to build up the thing that they're good at. So you had a guy that had a perfect math SAT, and he trashed the verbal. He's designing important stuff for NASA. I can't identify him, so I can't tell you what he designed, but I went in with the thing he designed. And what concerns me is what would happen to that kid today. And this is what Thomas Edison had to say about mathematicians. I can also always hire some, but they can't hire me. And if you think what I'm telling you about the different kinds of minds is a bunch of BS, I've got the science for this in my book, The Autistic Brain. But we need to build up on what they can do. You know, I used visual thinking in my cattle work. And then I learned that not everybody was a visual thinker. And there's the books that contains a lot of stuff about visual thinking. And I'm worried. With some of these strict algebra requirements, you got somebody that might want to go into sales getting totally screened out of college. What saved me was finite math was a required class. The educational fad, and education that's fads, in 1967 was finite math. Statistics, matrices, probability, and with tutoring, I could do that. But you need the visual thinkers to prevent messes like Fukushima. Nobody else saw that raccoon waddle down the steps of the launch pad except me. And I don't think raccoons should be in the launch pad. That worries me because I'm visualizing what he might chew on, and I saw some stuff that he could chew on that would be really, really serious if he chewed on it. Yep, we need the visual thinkers for that. That could wreck a mission, possibly. Okay, here's one of the problems we got now in science is a lot of problems with results not getting replicated. And one of the reasons for this is the methods part. I review a lot of journal articles, and the part I go over, and I've gone over a lot of journal articles for animal science and meat science, as I go and I look at the methods section, and they haven't told me what breed of pig they used. That's going to affect the results. There was a big important cancer study that couldn't be replicated. And the only difference in the methods is, well, one researcher lab shake them really hard like this, with some mechanical shaking thing, and the other just rocked them. It totally changed the results. Details of methods matter. And as a visual thinker, when I read the methods section of a paper, I want to be able to see in my mind how they did this experiment. I'll let somebody else handle the statistics, but I'm going to be the methods place. And I get all over the methods. And they don't tell me how the animals were housed. They don't tell me a whole lot of important stuff we need to know. Here it is. Vigorous stirring versus gentle rocking. Another experiment, it was how they picked up these little planaria worms, and you pick them up roughly, it wrecked the experiment. Different ways you can do the math. We get too hung up on just single ways of teaching math. Some kids are going to do it more visually. Some are going to do it more verbally. What's important is the end result. I spent 25 years working on designing things for major meat companies. All the cattle in Cargill plants in North America are handled in a center track restrainer system I designed. If you want to see how that works, you can go look it up in Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin. I'm not going to show that right now. And I designed stockyards. I think that's doing pretty good for somebody that was supposed to be, mentally handicapped. I was diagnosed as brain damaged as a child. There's some great little origami things some kids made. I think you need to touch in order to fully learn. I observed a very interesting thing when our industry went from hand drafting for designing stuff for plants to computer drafting. And when the old people went into the computer drafting, it was fine. But then I started getting drawings with weird mistakes. Things like the center of the circle's not in the center of the circle. Then I find out who drew it. And in every case, it was a young person who took a 2-year class in drafting at the community college. He'd never built anything, and he'd never drawn by hand. They were not seeing their drawings. One pork plant had 25-foot-long gates. Well, I don't think 25-foot-long gates in a pork plant are going to work very well. When I first looked at it fast, it looked okay, but then when I put the scale ruler on it, I go, no, no, no. Now, when you ask me to think about something like a church steeple, I see specific ones. They come up as specific pictures. A lot of verbal people see pointy thing. I don't see any pointy thing. I see specific ones. And then a physicist who worked on the Hubble Space Telescope saw motion of people singing and praying. He saw patterns, things in patterns, not pictures. Now, Steve Jobs was a visual thinker, and he designed the interface on the iPhone. Engineers had to make the inside work. Okay, so you need the different kinds of minds. Now that Steve is gone, we've got a lot of complicated garbage on this phone right now, and I don't know why it shows me messages from 2 days ago that I really could care less about. You see, the engineers like to put a lot of extra junk on it you don't really need. Yes, and then it was playing videos in the background and wrecking the battery. I finally figured out how to fix that problem. But it was simple. You didn't have to have a PhD in engineering to figure out how to use this phone. That's an example of the different minds working together. The visual thinker made the user interface. The engineers made it work on the inside. Now, I think you can get so over-specialized that it hinders creative problem solving. I went to a plant science meeting about a year ago. I was talking to a top plant scientist, and he said, I got this graduate student who's super smart, but he's got no creativity. Really good at doing some very, very small, narrow little thing. So Isaac Asimov, the great science fiction author, goes, a degree is the first step down a ruinous highway. You don't want to waste it, so you go into doctoral research, and you end up being a thoroughgoing ignoramus on everything in the world except for one subdivisional sliver of nothing. Yeah, I want you to think about that. Let's look at artificial intelligence. What's going to happen in the future? Whose job is going to go away? It's not going to be skilled trades. You think computers are going to pour concrete, put electrical wiring in, fix all the broken stuff after the storms? I don't think so. Mechanics are still going to be needed. It's going to take away the super specialized jobs. I wouldn't study dermatology right now. The computer's going to get your job. Okay, this is cover story less than a year ago in the journal Nature. An iPhone app that can diagnose melanoma better than a doctor can. So how do you teach the AI program how to do this? You give it 2,000 examples of melanoma, 2,000 examples of mosquito bites and scratches and everything else, and it learns how to sort melanoma from non-melanoma. That's the simple AI system. Now, I read a chemical engineering, like this little chemical engineering magazine, and what they're going to do with AI for material science is you train the AI program, you give it a bachelor's degree in chemistry, and then you let it earn its own PhD. You see, it can learn. It can keep learning. Or, just as I got on the plane before I came here, Science magazine had an article in there about the game Go, kind of a complicated chess-like game, and the computer can learn how to play it from scratch. Some of its thinking copies human thinking. Some of its thinking doesn't. And what they do is they're building circuits in the same architecture of the brain. They don't know how they work. So as a visual thinker, with all this stuff and all this hacking, there's very large infrastructure that we've got to protect. Big generating plants, refineries, got a lot of that stuff here. Water pumps you don't want run dry because that will wreck them. Oh, I can tell you how to make them hacker-proof. You put an old-fashioned electrical mechanical control, and if it gets too hot, spins too fast, or too much pressure, shuts down. No remote restart. That's hacker-proof. But the thing is, the engineers tend to not see it. Just like the water going into the Fukushima. If I'd been drawing the concrete side elevations for Fukushima, I would have gone, wait a minute. We've got the emergency thing that's super important with an electric motor, and it's in a non-waterproof basement. I can't design a nuclear reactor, but maybe I need to be working on the safety systems. Because all I need to know about that pump, and I only need to know one thing. If it doesn't work when I need it, it's like totally bad. It's like so bad, so bad, so bad, so bad. Now we call it a cluster. I'll leave it at that. In fact, it's beyond a cluster. It is so bad. It's still leaking. Now the way that AI is going to work, it's ultimate bottom-up thinking. You use specific examples to make concepts. This is exactly how I think. Most verbal thinkers are top-down. They tend to over-abstract, over-generalize. So when we're trying to solve behavior problems with a kid or behavior problems with a dog or a horse, they go, what do I do about autistic kids in the classroom? Well, I don't know what we're going to do with them. What do we do with crazy dogs? I don't know. Is he crazy happy or crazy nasty? I don't have enough information to be able to tell you. But the way the bottom-up thinker works is we do not make any hypothesis up front. We're using the patient-derived data to generate the hypothesis. That's exactly how I think. You put the pieces together and form the hypothesis. You don't have the hypothesis first. Yes, there's certain jobs that are going to go away. Dermatology, endocrinology, doctor jobs that are strictly knowledge. I wouldn't spend 10 years studying for that right now. Now, the frontline nurse, the frontline pediatrician, that's not going away. Frontline jobs are not going to go away. But there's a lot of jobs of pure thinking that will. And you're still going to need me to go, hey, a raccoon got in your launch pad. That may not be the best thing to have in your launch pad. And since Cape Kennedy is a wildlife refuge, we'll have to live trap him and move him out of there. But I'd like to put a GoPro in there first. I want to find out what he does in there. Does he just go in there and sleep, or is he causing trouble in there? I want to find out. Okay, visual thinkers like me, artificial intelligence, people with autism and ADHD and dyslexia, we're all bottom-up thinkers. See, when you think verbally, you tend to overgeneralize. Now, when you think in specifics, now the disadvantage of this kind of thinking, it takes tremendous amounts of data. Yeah, but now with computers, you can just go through all the data, start putting all the data, and forming the hypothesis. Verbal thinkers overgeneralize. Let's look at policy. When you have people too far removed from the real thing, they don't make good policy. You know what we have good policy on in this country and many other countries? There's a reason for it. There's three things: traffic and traffic rules, elevator safety, and basic aviation safety. And the reason why we have sensible regulation on that all around the world is that every legislature and every government, cars and elevators use every day, planes probably twice a month. They don't want to die. It's that simple. It's not abstract. Nobody's going to get in there and say, well, let's repeal the drunk driving rules. Don't think anybody's going to want to do that. Yeah, also, in working with animals, they are sensory-based. Think pictures. Think auditory. It's sensory, it's not words. And then being a visual thinker really helped me understand animal behavior because I noticed things that other people didn't notice. Okay, how many people recognize what that is in this picture? It's eclipse shadows. Now, I didn't know that eclipses made these shadows. This is on our campus at Colorado State. We had a 95% eclipse. And I watched students walk over this and not see it. In fact, I was kind of annoyed at how oblivious some of the students were. We had maybe 20% of the students that were really interested, and the rest of the students were walking around like it wasn't there. You don't have an eclipse every day. No, there's a lot of things in the natural world that might be more interesting than the stuff that's in your phone. Yeah, we went to the moon with a little tiny peanut of a computer. And right here, we've got a supercomputer in our pocket, and again, we use it for dumb things. Now, the thing I really love is how I can look things up on Google, look up articles. The library is in my pocket. I love that. When I was an undergraduate, we had a time capsule to go in our library. And I snuck into the maintenance office to add something to the time capsule, a little piece of paper that said, what is knowledge and why do we seek it? And then another thing they put in it was this telephone dial, because in the future, this is in the late 60s, we were going to have dial access library. Nobody foresaw we could end up having the library in our pocket. Chains hanging down in chutes. Why after 40 years do I still have to talk about this? Because people are not removing them. I had a really cool time in Ireland. I had a client, we rented this big black helicopter. You want a good entrance to a meat plant? You land on their lawn in a black helicopter. Then get out, and I go in with handling the beef cattle, and the cattle refused to go in the stun box. And I looked at the door, and it had 6 holes this big in the door, and they could see motion through it. 6 pieces of duct tape fixed it. It still sometimes blows my mind that something that simple can work. That's using behavior. Okay, you've got a shadow on the floor. You've got a reflection on the floor. Now, one good thing here is you can see light through here. But I guess I still have job security because I have to give people checklists. And I have a new book, Temple Grandin's Guide to Working with Farm Animals. Lots of nice colored pictures in it. And checklists of things to look for. Non-slip flooring, super important for animals. Super important. Animals freak out and get really upset when they start slipping. Now let's see how good you guys are at visual thinking. How many people saw that animal was looking at a sunbeam? Oh, we're not doing very good here. You know who does better? Elementary school children. They do a whole lot better. Over half the hands will go up. Now, this is something I get emotional about. When I look at the space program, and I stood and I stared up at the vehicle assembly building, I got really emotional. This trip to Cape Kennedy was extremely emotional. And I looked at why was this so important? Why were things like Voyager so important? It's pure exploration when we did this. Seek. I was just talking to the animal behavior students about different traits that cattle can have, like fearfulness, separation distress. But there's another trait called seek. That's the urge to explore. These are the Panskep emotional systems. And I read an article in the New York Times Magazine. I just started crying when I read about the 81-year-old scientist. Voyager still works 40 years later. 81-year-old scientist. Mission Control is now in a shopping mall next to a McDonald's and a puppy training center. And they're still getting knowledge from it. And we may find out from the knowledge that they'll get from this why we're a Class M planet. And if you're a Star Trek fan, that means a planet that can support life. And in order to get the signal, because it's super weak, they have to have 3 giant dish antennas all at once, all around the world, pulling the signal. Yes, and they're running out of money. But there's people with Asperger's running those antennas that make sure they get the signal. Now, I get really choked up about this. So what would you rather do? Cool stuff like this or stupid video games? Yeah, we do dumb things with our technology now. And when I went back and I remember going and looking at the spacesuits, and they were sewed by hand. The moon suit was sewed by hand by the very best bra seamstresses at the Playtex company. They had to go with a soft suit because the other metal ones were too heavy. A lot of the stuff they used was really quite low tech. And we went to the moon. It was seek and explore, discover new things. That's why it was important. And there's stuff from another satellite, the rings of Saturn. Here's the 81-year-old Ed Stone. And I just get very emotional about this. We did some of our finest stuff. I'm really glad to see that SpaceX and Blue Origin are now building things at Kennedy. Yes, and they're hiring. So let's drag the kids off the video games. The mathematician kids, you're going to engineering school. I'll pick out the courses for you. And you're going to intern at SpaceX, and they're going to work your hindy off. And it's going to be so much more fun than video games. But one of the problems that I'm seeing with the fully verbal kids is moms that get overprotective. I saw a 13-year-old fully verbal kid who had never shopped in a store by himself. And I suggested to his mom that he should buy some printer paper. And she started crying over printer paper. And she said, I can't let go. But what happens is the disability takes over from, let me tell you, you got lots of unique people working in Silicon Valley, working at NASA, and they weren't the greatest kids at school. Yeah, I want them to see go do the fun stuff. And here's ways you can teach kids how to work. Okay, 10 or 12 years old, paper route substitutes, walking dogs, selling cookies, running yard sales, volunteer at the church. I want them doing jobs on a schedule outside the family. They've got to start learning how to work for people that are not their parents. And schoolwork and work skills are not the same. So I spent 3 years at a very expensive boarding school of horse barn management. And I think Mr. Patey realized I had to get through my adolescence, but I was also learning how to work. I was proud of the fact that I was running the horse barn, put them in and out, fix the horse barn, and the horses kick the hole in it, feed them. Here's my job stuff. Sewing job at 13 for a freelance seamstress who worked in her house. Horse stall cleaning at 15. Roofing at 16. Yep, lots of fun. Probably wouldn't be legal now. Man, it was fun. And we saw a partial eclipse while I was on the roof of the dairy barn while we were throwing shingles. Sign painting, go out and sell things. My very first job was making a sign for a beauty shop, and I had to make a sign that they would want. One of the problems with some of the kids that are doing art, they're not learning how to do art on assignment. Carpentry work, college internship. I had a job at a research lab. I had another job as an autism aide. Learning how to work, really important. And when I was in the School of Horse Barn Management, it was also the School of Carpentry. And you can see how I fixed up our ugly Skeeto house, make it really nice. And then when I was getting my master's, I was painting signs at the Arizona State Fair. I painted that sign up there, the Himalayan monster. You know what's sad now? There's no hand-painted signs anymore. That was pretty sad. When I was looking around the Colorado State Fair, I was looking for hand-painted signs. So how did I get that job? I showed a sign painter my portfolio. When you're weird, the way you get jobs and get into things is to show off your portfolio. That's how you get into things. All right, let's say you couldn't graduate from high school and you couldn't do algebra. You get a good enough portfolio and get it together, it won't matter. Now if you can do it, do it. But I'm really concerned. I've talked to provosts of some of the community colleges. Here you got someone who wants to be an English major, and they can do everything else, every other class. Why not let them take geometry? I don't know what the hang-up on algebra is. After all, the Greeks invented geometry first. So why is algebra the prerequisite for geometry? That doesn't make any sense to me. I'm there right there with my sign painting truck. I was not over-specialized. Took biology, psychology, and what one of my favorite classes was, and I thought I'd hate this class, it was English literature. And I liked this class. It was one of these big survey courses. It wasn't over-specialized. A little bit of Moby Dick, a little bit of other things, and the teacher explained emotionally what the authors were trying to get across. Loved that class, thought I was going to hate it. You need to have some breadth. Okay. Science teacher got me motivated. I had some great mentors. And out at the ranch, I get asked all the time, how did a girl from Boston get interested in cattle? I was exposed to them as a teenager. And one of the problems we got right now is we've got teenagers today that can't do basic hands-on things. I talked to a lady just a few months ago who runs a therapeutic riding stable. She had to teach 4 or 5 teenagers how to hook up a garden hose. I am serious. So we get into some of these issues about ag issues and things like this. Part of the problem today, it isn't just separated from ag. You get outside of Texas, you've got people that are totally separated from practical things. You're still keeping some of that stuff in your schools. But we've got schools in some states where they've taken all that stuff out. Sewing, cooking, woodworking, art, music. The other thing is, these things introduce students to careers, too. Well, what would happen to me today? I had no speech until age 4. I would probably get really good early intervention. Okay, in the autism world, they're doing a good job with the little kids. But where we're falling down is with the older kids. I want to get the transition to work done before they graduate. We've got to control the video game playing because they're not having good outcomes. I spent 25 years working on construction projects, designing stuff for big places like Cargill. And in construction, it's all about the outcome. You've got to get there, and there might be different roads to get to the same outcome. I would have gotten excellent speech therapy. I'd be a prime candidate for video game addiction. No, we got to get it under control. What they're doing in China right now is that after the kids have played the video game for an hour, the internet provider shuts it off. Okay, my people might say, well, you're just an ancient old fogey. Why are you getting so down on video games? But I'm not seeing good outcomes. If they were becoming video game designers, I'd have a better attitude about it. We got to get teenagers out working. And also, don't let yourself just get defined by the label. Too many kids come up to me and they say, I have autism like you. Why don't you tell me you want to be an astronomer? You want to be a rancher? Something that is a job. I want you to think about something. A lot of last names, common last names, are jobs. Cook, baker, farmer, carpenter. Really common last names. They're professions. Okay, here's what a scientist had to say about taking hands-on labs out. Practical experiments teach the reality of science with all its frustrations and rewards. Yes, and there's the garden hose. They can't figure out how to hook up the garden hose. Well, I like to do some traveling through inner space to see what's inside my own mind, the urge to explore. So when some new brain scanning equipment comes out, I got to go try it. I'll tell you right now, this stuff is not commercially available. Don't even think about it. But what's happened is everything that showed up in the brain scan showed up in the classroom. Being good at art. That showed up when I was in about 3rd grade. So take the kids' ability in art and expand on it. Mother always got me drawing lots of different kinds of art, doing art on assignment. Turns out that I have a great big visual thinking circuit. Well, this shows you right here what happened to the algebra department. It's full of water. One of the problems is I have a very bad working memory. So one of the ways to get around that in the workplace is if you have a task that has a sequence, pilot's checklist. Okay, ice cream machine, tear down, checklist. Cleaning steps, reassemble steps. Pilot's checklist, easy workaround. Well, the meat industry has no academic barrier of entry. I actually originally wanted to go into biomedical science, but you need the visual thinker. See, let's look at design. And they came out with a Jarvik artificial heart, a beat. But then somebody goes, well, why does it have to beat? Why don't you just have a little pump? It worked fine. You see, that's getting into a totally different kind of design. And my mother pounded open the back door of the college, and I got in on probation. I worked really hard, and I did well in school once I had a goal that I wanted to do. Came from an educated family. My ability in art was nurtured. I spent lots of time making helicopters and kites. All that stuff's going to be in my new book, Calling All Minds. It's aimed at kids, get them interested in inventing and doing things with their hands. My favorite book when I was in elementary school was about famous inventors, and I also loved Black Beauty, both the children's version and the grown-up version. Rode horses in school, learned carpentry, took experimental psychology. But when I was in 9th grade, I was a real poor student. But one of the things I was good at was writing. My writing skills in 9th grade were better than some students today. And one of the reasons for that is the teacher would red mark up and copy edit my work. And I've seen students today in college and graduate school where their writing skills are absolutely horrible because nobody copy edited their work to teach them how to write correctly. Now, when you're weird, you got to show people your work. So there's the drawing. That's the drawing right there that I sent to the head of Cargill in the late 80s to sell them on having me do design work. In a portfolio, what you want is a 30-second wow. They open it up, and yeah, you may be weird, but I drew that. There's the brochure that I had, my original brochure. And here's the original DipVat projects that were shown in the movie. Now, a guy will often take a job when they're at the 60% level of ability. A girl wants to get to the 90% level. That's what Sheryl Sandberg said in her book, Lean In. When I said yes for designing the DipVat, I was at the 60% level. And I said to Gary Oden, who ran McElhaney Feed Yard, give me 3 weeks. Boy, I had a lot of learning. I didn't know how to do the reinforced concrete stuff. Man, I got on the phone. I called up Texas A&M. I actually called John Sweeten, who's here at Texas A&M, and I called a veterinarian in Washington, D.C., so I could get the concrete reinforcement drawings and stuff on a hydrosieve system for cleaning all the gunk out of the dip vat. And there's the one they built for the movie. I love the fact in the movie that they recreated all my projects. And there's starting out in construction, some of my projects. And working in construction affects how I think about things because it's all about outcomes. I want a student in school to have a good outcome, get into a career that they're really going to like. And here's a new plant just getting finished up. I love to show this to special ed teachers. I call that heavy steel. And one of the things that's happening is that they can't find people to do some of this steel work. This is the center track restrainer that's just getting finished up, getting built at a new plant up in Idaho. Took that picture just about 6 months ago. There's the original dip vat drawings I did back in 1978. When you're weird, you learn to sell your work. You sell your work rather than yourself. And then I had pictures in the portfolio. So I had the drawing, I had the brochure, I had pictures of projects. Basically what you want is a 30-second wow. And half the cattle right now handle an equipment that I designed. Now when I first started, I thought I could fix everything in the cattle industry with equipment. If you could just build the right equipment. That's a common engineering mistake. Fix it all with equipment. But the other half of the equation is the management. And I found it was a lot easier to sell the thing than it was to get people to operate the thing correctly. Okay, there's the center track restrainer, a diagram of how it works. Detail of design matters. To get the cattle in there, it's all about what they say. Now, this is a very simple scoring system that I developed for the American Meat Institute, which is now the North American Meat Institute. We're going to measure 5 simple things, critical control points that are outcomes of problems. And when we first started assessing stunning back in the bad old days, before McDonald's and other companies started putting pressure on the meat industry, the main reason for bad stunning was broken equipment. That's a management problem. So you measure these things. Focalization when you handle cattle. If they're mooing and bawling when you're handling them or restraining them, you're doing something bad to them. That was a really good measure for problems. Falling down during handling, prod score. Well, I'm going to show you a graph I'm really proud of. In 1996, when I collected baseline data, only 30% of the plants could stun 95% of the plants on the first shot because the guns were busted. Then when McDonald's came in, we started making them fix stuff. And the reason why this worked is I wasn't telling them how to build a plant. They had to achieve outcomes. It was like traffic rules for meatpacking plants. You can't measure everything, so what's the important stuff to measure? All right, let's go back to traffic. If you could only enforce 3 rules in traffic, you're only allowed to enforce 3 rules, what 3 things would you enforce to get the most public safety? Okay, give me an idea right here. You're only allowed to enforce 3 things. So you want to enforce the 3 things that are really important. Stopping and speeding, yes. But what happens is the 800-pound gorilla, drunk driving, always gets left to last. That is probably big number 1. So the trick is you've got to figure out exactly what's the important stuff for you to measure. Now let's look at who builds something like a big packing plant. The visual thinkers in the drafting department design the whole plant. The degreed engineers don't lay out the plant. In fact, one of the problems with the degreed engineers is they'll bring a young kid into a job and contractors are just ripping them off and they don't know any of the practical stuff. And then you have the millwrights that invent the new equipment, and then the formal degreed engineer is going to do boilers, refrigeration, calculate roof trusses. Yeah, we've got to have the different kinds of minds. And somebody didn't calculate something right on the top of the overhang on the new hotel because it looked out the window and the metal's getting bent. It's only a matter of time before it wrecks the woodwork underneath. I was checking that out. And right there, I am on the site of our new chemistry building. It's now finished. absolutely gorgeous chemistry building. And the project manager is Tina. Now, Tina has a very interesting history. She was a political science major, so she found something really good to do with a political science degree. She got a job with a construction company answering phones. Then she switched over to working on some of the bidding, auditing, the accounting, office stuff. Then she started going out the field. So that's how a poli-science major gets to being project manager. Well, you need some people just to manage the people, the management side of the job. Yeah, because you always got the squabbles on the construction site that you've got to deal with. Now, when I learned that visual thinking was different from verbal thinking, it gave me insight that the different kinds of minds, once they recognize how they think differently, they can see how the skills complement each other, and they do other different parts of the project. And I just want to end up and say, we got to make sure that educators do not screen out some of these unique students because we need all the different kinds of minds. Thank you very much.